Hey guys, in this video we'll be continuing with the Visual C# tutorials. So we'll be using Visual Studio today. So we'll be getting started with forms and controls. So to start, we'll basically just work with some controls and the form. So we'll be continuing with the Visual Studio Designer toolbox and properties window to build the apps form with the controls and set the controls properties. So we'll have to talk about some stuff first. So the apps form, so the applications form when you start a new Visual C# project. Visual Studio automatically creates an empty form and displays it in the designer. Oh yeah, so apologize if the sound is too quiet. I have to use a different recorder that's not built into Windows and it seems to be a little quieter, so I'll try to be as loud as I can. If not, hopefully you have some headphones available and can turn the volume up. Alright, so you can think of a empty form as a blank canvas that can be used to create the app's user interface. You can add controls to the form, change the form size, modify the form's properties. When the app runs, the form will be displayed on the screen. Okay, so we'll be moving on from that. If you take a closer look at the form, you will notice that it is enclosed by a thin dotted line known as the bounding box. So this line around the, I don't know if you can see it, but you can basically drag the size here. So the bounding box has small sizing handles which appear on the form's right edge, bottom edge, the corners and stuff. When a bounding box appears around an object in the designer, it indicates that the object is selected and ready to be worked with. So you can just click on this form and then you'll get the bounding box around it. You can change the size, you can move it around. Actually, I don't know if you can move it around at this time. You can change the size. You can move these other windows around. I think they have a bounding box and you can move those around as well. Kind of messes things up though, sometimes, like that. So I'd maybe just leave it as it is. Alright, so that's fine. Should be okay, so we'll just leave it like that. So we'll be moving on to the next topic now. So initially the form size is 300 pixels wide by 300 pixels high. You can easily resize the form with the mouse. We're going to use the properties to change it as well by actually typing the properties in, deleting and editing that. So we'll do that in a sec. So you'll see the two-headed arrow when you try to resize it by clicking on the form and using the bounding box to change the size. So you can identify forms and controls by their names. So an app's GUI is made of forms and various controls. Each form and control in an app's GUI must have a name that identifies it, so a name is basically a variable, like a coding variable. So the blank form that Visual Studio initially creates in a new project is named Form1, so that's the default name. Later in the book, you'll learn how to change the form's name. Sorry, not the book. So later in the tutorial, sorry, I'm reading my notes from my class, the class that I took, and I'm kind of just working with the notes here. to do the tutorial for you guys. So basically later on we'll learn how to change a form's name. But right now we'll keep the default name, which is form1. Okay, so the properties window we talked about. So the appearance and other characteristics of a GUI object are determined by the object's properties. When you select an object in the designer, the object's properties are displayed in the properties window. For example, when the form1 form is selected, its properties are displayed in the properties window. So this is a properties window. As you can see, we have different. Actually, I'll try to move that over a bit if I can. You have to actually hold it for a sec before you move it over. So as you can see, we have different properties. Name. It scrolls all the way down to Windows state. So we'll be working with text size and name, I think, in this one. Obviously, there's a lot of properties. Over the course of the series, we'll be coding these, so you can also code these. We'll be doing that later on, and working with the drag and drop part of Visual Studio 2. So we'll be using most of these probably by the end of the series. So I think we'll be using XML or CSS later on, so we'll discuss that later on. Basically, that's a way to design front end for apps, so like front end coding stuff, development. Will show front end is like the way that the app looks, so we'll be working with that stuff later on, don't worry. So let's see, we'll move on to the next part. So the area at the top of the properties window shows the name of the object that is currently selected. So we can click the form1 and you'll see the name. If I scroll this up, see name is set to form1. This isn't this name, that's a text property, so the actual name on the form in that upper window, like kind of on like a Windows window on the form, that's the text property. So not the name. The name is basically the variable name, so that name doesn't show up to the user. Alright, so from after that, so we just talked about the name. So the list of properties, so in the properties window has two columns, so there's a name and a value. So the left column shows each property's name and the right column shows the value of the property. So if we scroll down to the form's size property, so default should usually be 300 by 300. 300 pixels wide by 300 pixels high. So we'll change that later on. And then the form's text property. Hopefully you guys can see these. If you can't, I don't think I can make these bigger, so you'll have to zoom in on your device. Apologize for that if you can't see it. So we have, where's the text property? Okay, so we have the text property down there, so kind of near the bottom. Fifth one from the bottom. So text, it says form1. We're gonna change that in a sec. So the text property determines the text that is displayed in the form's title bar, the bar that appears at the top of the form, or basically the window, which is the form. to the user it's going to be the form, but to the developer to the user it's going to be a window, but to the developer it's a form. So the current value is form1, so the text is displayed in the form's title bar. When a form is created, its text property is initially set to the same value as the form's name. When you start a new project, the blank form that appears in the designer will always be named form1, so the text form1 will always appear in the form title bar. In most cases, you want to change the value of the form's text property to something, basically something that matches what the app or the form does. So whatever component of the GUI or control of the GUI is, you kind of want to name it. You want to set the text property to something that matches the control, and usually the name the same thing. So for example, maybe you'd have the name property as like button1 or OK button, whatever. If you use camel casing, or you just use underscores, whatever you want, whatever you prefer. Capitals, no capitals, probably you wouldn't want to capitalize that, maybe camel case it. The text property you would not want to change to like OK button. You'd maybe want to change the text to OK, and the name or the identifier so the name property in that case would be OK button, but the text property would just be OK. So hopefully that makes sense. So we can change the text property of our form. So in the properties window, locate the text property, double click the word form1. So we already have it here. I'll double click form1, delete what's in the name. I'll maybe name it like window. Actually, what should I name it? So we could just name it to like first program, whatever, or first app, my first app, whatever you want. Hit enter. No, something messed up. Something messed up there. So we'll just try that again. So I'll double click the value beside the text property. So the property name. So the property text name. I'm going to double click the value beside that. I'm going to hit delete, and I'm typing my first value. Sorry, not value. My first app. In this case, you probably want to capitalize it because it's the name of something the user will see. So once again, so that's pretty much it. So once again, changing an object's text property does not change the object's name. For example, if you change the form's text property to my first app, the form's name is still form1. You have changed only the text that is displayed in the form's title bar, basically, which is what the user can see. The variable or the identifier name, property name, will still be form1, I believe. Alright, so we'll be moving on to the next part. So now we'll be working with. So we learned how to resize a form basically with the mouse. Another method you can use to change the form size property is using the properties window. So we can search for the size property. Basically the same thing. Find it beside the name. Click the value. So can delete it. You could probably just start typing whatever, and then so make sure you type it this way. So we'll go 400 comma space 400, then hit enter, and it'll change the size. As you can see, it resized on the fly. We do that again, we'll change it to like 500 comma space 500, and you could change it to whatever you want. So that's it. So move on to adding controls to a form. So when you're ready to create controls in Visual Studio, basically using Visual C#, you can use the toolbox. So the toolbox we talked about earlier, it's on the left side. You have to click the tab to open the toolbox, and we have common controls. We'll be working with just those for now. So if the toolbox is in auto hide mode, we talked about this, click the tab to open it, or use search in the view look in the view tab in the menu bar, I believe at the top. This thing, view, click that button, search for it. It'll be in one of the options. It may be hiding somewhere, so just look around in view for the toolbox if you can't find it. So now we will drag a button on, I believe. Or actually, you don't have to drag it on. You just have to double click it. We'll do an example in a sec. So the toolbox shows the scrollable list of controls that you can add to a form. So you just find what you want in the toolbox and double click it. I don't think you have to drag it. So the control will be created on the form. So if you want to create a button control on the form, you just find it in the toolbox, double click it, and a button control will appear on the form. So again, you can code this as well. This is just one way. We're going to be coding it after. So this is just one way to use Visual Studio. Sometimes that helps because you may not know how to get something to a certain space. Like if you want to put the button, for example, in like the bottom right corner versus the middle. Versus the top left corner, you may not know how to do that in the code, so you might want to try to basically put it on the form first, then see how the code looks like, then edit the code to get it where you want, and then you can use that to clone other buttons and all that. That may help. That's what I kind of did with Android development. So we'll get those tutorials out there soon. Apologize for that, kind of behind on videos. I have like over 100 videos just sitting waiting to be uploaded. So yeah, things maybe even closer to 150 now. So we will be moving on to adding a button control to the form. I don't think we actually added one yet. Okay, so we will add a button. So we'll find it in the toolbox. I'll click the toolbox on the left. I'll find the button, double click it. Then our button should have appeared on the form. Now we have our button. We can find our button here. So if we click the form, where the properties is going to be related to the form. If we click the button, the properties will change to the button's properties. If we click the form, the form's properties, it'll be the form's properties. If we click the button, it'll be the button's properties in the properties window. So we can find the size, change it to like 100 comma space 100. That might be kind of weird, so we'll go with maybe 200 by 50. We'll just try that. 200 comma, whoops, that was the wrong number. 200 comma space 50. Sorry, the text is small. It's hard for me to see. Okay, so we'll position it by dragging for now. That's should be okay. Actually, maybe we'll just drag it resize it to something else, because we'll add 2 or something. So button 1. Looks like we're making kind of like a sketchy malware pop-up or something. Okay, so we have button 1 on the side. So we have a button. Now we have a button. So you can resize and move the controls again. So you can delete a control by selecting it, basically by getting the bounding box up. So just click on it, click the delete or backspace on your keyboard. I'm not going to be doing that, but if you need to delete a control, that's how you do it. So we learned earlier that each form and each control in an app's GUI must have a name that identifies it. When you create button controls, for example, they're automatically given names such as button 1, button 2, and button 3. So if we keep clicking the button in the toolbox, or the button tab, we'll get another button, which will get placed in the, okay, it might not always be in the same spot, but it should be named button 2. We'll just resize it with the mouse. It may not be exactly perfect, probably not. So button 2, button 1. Now we have button 2, button 1. If you really want to get the size and align them, we'll be doing the alignment stuff later on, but we'll learn how to code it so it's in the proper view and all that. Now we have a button 2 and a button 1. If we click the button, or if we click the button tab again in the toolbox, we'll get button 3. If you keep clicking it, button 4, button 5, they'll all pop up on the form. So after you create a button control, you should always change its text property and the name property. So the text that is displayed on the button obviously should match what the button should match the button's function pretty much. So let's change some properties for our buttons. We'll select maybe button 1 first. We'll go down to the text. We'll just maybe change. So we'll double click text. Sorry, something's loading. Something happened. Okay, so we'll go back to the design tab. I'll double click button 1. So okay, maybe don't double click it, just click it once. Then I'll double click button 1. Okay, there we go. So we'll change that to maybe like cancel. And we'll go back up to the top of the properties window. We'll double click beside the name property. We'll change that to maybe cancel button, camel cased. I think I didn't spell that right. Something's wrong with that. Alright, so we have our name, cancel button. The text property is now cancel, and we could change the size if we want, which we already did. We'll do the same for button 2. We'll change the, whoops, I double clicked it again. Just click it once. When the bounding box appears with the little arrows on the side, then we'll click the text property value, change that to OK, hit enter. Then we'll move back up to the name property, double click the value, we'll change that to OK or OK button. Kind of camel case like that. So that's pretty much it. that should be pretty much it for the whatever tutorial this is, well, the number, but this was basically just we're starting to work with controls and forms, so I think that's what we said at the beginning. So in the next tutorial we'll be going over creating basically the Hello World application, where we'll click something and another form will pop up, and we'll probably be getting into the coding too. So hopefully I'll see you guys there. If you guys like the video, you can like the video if you like. You can subscribe to the channel for more programming and investing tutorials. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.